Welcome to the Jamesburg Presbyterian Church. Today is Tuesday, April the 20th, 2021. Good to know that you're here watching on Facebook. Good to know that you're here watching on YouTube. Today we're launching into a study on the book of Jonah. It's a short book, just 37 verses, but it's also just 4 chapters. Each chapter I'll do one chapter each week. Each chapter will stand alone so that if you miss one chapter, of course, you can always go back and watch the recording, but you will be able to get something out of each installment. You'll probably notice that I've been selecting books that are rather short. This is because before COVID, I was getting into very long books and going through each chapter very carefully and talking about all of the history and theology and themes in each chapter. I've decided to do things differently since COVID, and so I've been picking shorter books and things that we can go through rather quickly. One of the things that I'll say about Jonah right from the very beginning is that it's unfortunately been relegated to a children's story, and as such, it's taught in Sunday schools, and the emphasis of the book tends to be on chapter 2, maybe chapter 1, but definitely chapter 2. And then we go on to something else. At least that's my impression. And that's unfortunate because the book is an extremely sophisticated book with profound theological themes. The book is humorous. It has incredible literary devices. The other problem with the book is that it gets translated into English, and because we don't understand broken sentences, we don't understand generally some uses of words that we may find strange, we retranslate the book to make sense for us. And in doing so, we lose irony, we lose humor, we lose a whole bunch of nuance from our study of the book. So in this study, we're going to be taking a look at those kinds of things and translating some of the sentences literally. The book of Jonah appears at a time in history, we think, when there was a huge hatred for the Gentile world, and understandably so. When you are a nation like Israel or Judah, Judah being the southern kingdom, Israel being the northern kingdom, and you're threatened by international powers. You're threatened by empires that intend to expand upon you, and they do it through military devices. And when you come into a city, you totally annihilate the city. It's easy to develop a hatred for those kinds of powers, those people. They become your enemies. And so this book of Jonah raises the question, can God love our enemies? Does God care about people we hate? That's a rather profound theological theme. And the answer is startling, especially when we get into chapter 4 and we get that answer. So we're not told very much about Jonah in chapter 1, just the barest of details, and then we launch into the story. I'm going to move in my notes to the beginning of the beginning, and we'll come back and catch some of the themes when we need to. So chapter 1 begins with Jonah. And unfortunately, again, in order to clean up the first sentence so that we understand it, we usually get these words. The word of the Lord came to Jonah. That's verse 1. Actually, here's how it should be translated or understood. It came to pass, the word of the Lord to Jonah. In other words, it's almost like a beginning of a tale. Does this mean that this book is related to some other book? Maybe, maybe not. But it came to pass, the word of the Lord to Jonah. I think that I like that so much better. The second verse has three imperatives. The first is arise. Second is go. And the third is preach or cry or proclaim. The Hebrew word there is not entirely clear. It could be any of those. It could be all of those at the same time. Arise, go, proclaim. That's going to be important because we're going to see those three words appear throughout chapter 1 in a number of different instances. So Jonah does arise and he does go, but he goes in the opposite direction because he hates the people of Nineveh. He's supposed to go to the city of Nineveh and preach against it because of its wickedness. And the wickedness has come to God's attention, we are told. So Jonah does arise, he does go, but he goes to a ship that's going to Tarshish. The whole idea is he doesn't want to have anything to do with this. He does not want to help the people of Nineveh because of his bitterness and hatred towards the people there. And again, it's because the people of Nineveh and the people of Israel or Judah are enemies, profoundly so. So the three divines are there, the three imperatives are there: arise, go, and proclaim or preach. Interestingly enough, we're not told what he's supposed to preach. That's a kind of ambiguous statement there. Go preach. Preach what? What do you want me to do specifically? We're not told exactly what the assignment is. So Jonah does arise, he does go, but he doesn't proclaim. In the third verse, we're told that Jonah goes to a ship, and we're told that he pays the fare. Let me read this. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, it's interesting that, again, we're translating into English, he paid the fare. Actually, ship is feminine in Hebrew, and so the correct translation is he paid her fare, which is interesting because the English gives the impression that he bought a ticket for himself, whereas the Hebrew makes it sound as though he hired the whole ship. In other words, he's paying everything. He has hired the ship, whatever it costs. That's how desperate he is to get away from God. So he pays the whole thing. All right. So verse 4 in chapter 1 says, the Lord sent a great wind on the sea. Actually, the Hebrew word is hurled. God took that wind and threw it. It's a very violent kind of verb. God hurled such a violent storm that the storm, that the ship was being threatened to break apart. Actually, the Hebrew makes it kind of humorous. The Hebrew says the ship was thinking about breaking apart. Of course, we know that inanimate objects don't think. So in order to clean this up so that it makes sense to us English readers, we translate it so that it doesn't have the ship thinking about anything. But actually, God hurled this storm, and it was so violent that the ship was thinking about breaking apart. And the sailors became afraid, and each of them called out to their gods. And then they did something that sailors probably shouldn't do. They were lightening the load. Actually, in a storm, you want the ship to be in the water, not floating on top of the water, because there's more violence to the waves. So they started throwing the cargo overboard. Now, most of the time we think that this is the sailors were just being desperate. They were just being dumb. But actually, when you think about it, when they're calling out to their God and they're throwing the cargo overboard, they're actually offering sacrifices to the God of the ocean. What do they have to offer? The cargo, that precious stuff in the hold of the ship that they were taking to another city. They were actually throwing that overboard to appease the God of the ocean. Jonah has previously gone down, and we're going to see that as a theme. Every time we see or hear about Jonah, he has gone down further, deeper into whatever. Right now, he's gone down into the ship, and the captain comes and says, "How can you sleep? Arise, go and call, proclaim, cry out." Same sort of message that God gave him. The captain is now giving him that same message, the same 3 Hebrew imperatives. Call out to your God, cry out to your God, proclaim. All the Hebrew word means the same thing. So again, Jonah is being reminded, and it's kind of an irony because the message he's running away from is exactly what the captain is telling him to do, and he can't run away from it this time. But the idea is, hopefully, if you do these things, your God will save each one of us. Again, the commentaries usually say that everything that the sailors were doing was the exact wrong thing to do to survive a storm. The final part of this chapter 1 is the sailors have a meeting, which is kind of comedy. It's hilarious. Here you are, you're being tossed about all over the place, and you stop to have a meeting. And in this meeting, you're going to draw lots to see whose fault this is, as if that is going to work. Who did this? Somebody has done something wrong, and that's why we're in this predicament. So they stop what they're doing, stop sailing the ship to have the meeting to draw straws, so that they can find out who's responsible for this problem. Now, again, the English translation of verse 9 is, Jonah says, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." This doesn't really give us a good translation of the Hebrew. Literally, what Jonah says is, "Yahweh, God of the heavens, I am fearing who made the sea and dry land." It doesn't make as much sense to English readers, but it does when it's read literally. It's a different meaning than "I am a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." They ask him, "What have you done?" And he said that he was running away from God, and everything was getting worse. And they ask him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" And he says, "Pick me up and throw me into the ocean." Now, here's kind of a nuance to this. He has gone down into the hold of the ship where he's fallen asleep. As they're taking out the cargo, he becomes the cargo. He's hired the ship. He is the reason the ship is going somewhere else. They have other things on the ship to do, but he is the primary cargo of that ship. So if you want to appease the God of the ocean, throw this cargo, Jonah, overboard. That's the idea here. The men don't want to do this. They said, "No, we can't do this." So what they do is they try to, it says, row their way back to land. So again, the worst thing that you can do is try to get to the shore if you're a ship, because the waves will throw you onto the shore and you will wreck. So again, a bad idea. The other thing is the Hebrew says rowing, they were digging into the water. So they weren't using their oars on the surface of the ship to move them along. They were digging into the water. Again, not something that the sailors would do. So that either they're inexperienced or they are in a panic. And I think that that's the idea here. They are in such a panic that they're forgetting everything that they know about how to do sailing. And also, again, remember I used that word hurl. God hurled a storm. The sailors hurled the cargo into the ocean. Then it says, the English translation says, so they asked Jonah questions. Actually, the Hebrew says they hurled questions at Jonah. A consistent use of that word hurl. And some of the questions they might have asked him is his occupation, his origin, and what people was he from. And Jonah answers the questions in reverse order, and they realize that he is the problem. So when he says, pick me up and throw me into the sea, he actually says, pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Again, using that same word. In other words, it's a violent kind of throwing. Hurl me into the sea. And this evokes the same past actions that we have seen. God hurling the wind, the sailors hurling the wares, the sailors hurling the questions, hurl me into the sea. Jonah does not offer to jump overboard. I think that's interesting. He puts it on the men. If you want to calm this thing down, throw me overboard. Hurl me into the sea. Here's the idea. Jonah is so desperate to get away from God that he will even prefer death over going to Nineveh to save those people. That's how much he hates the people of Nineveh. He would prefer to die in the ocean than to live and do what God has called him to do. So he has disobeyed the commands of God. He has disobeyed the commands of the captain. Remember, the captain says, go out and call to your God. Jonah hasn't done that. He is not called to God. So he's disobeyed everybody so far. And finally what happens is that when the sailors see that nothing is working, they don't have any more options, they do, in fact, take Jonah and hurl him overboard. That's the Hebrew word that's used. And immediately the ocean becomes peaceful. And at this, verse 16 says, at this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to the Lord. We're not told that they become Jewish converts, but they certainly see God, the God of Israel, Yahweh. They certainly see God as the God of the ocean. And the implication here is that the sailors have now become more like worshipers of God than Jonah, who is running away from God. They actually have a reverence for this God as compared to Jonah, who is doing everything he can to get away from God. So this is verse 16. We're stopping here. Next week we'll pick up with verse 17 in chapter 1. Only one verse left, because that actually should be part of chapter 2, and we'll take care of all of chapter 2, and then the following week chapter 3, and then the following week chapter 4. On May the 11th we will be finished with the book of Jonah. So again, very sophisticated book, a very humorous book. We're going to see chapter 2. I think it's one of the funniest books of the Bible, but again, profoundly significant, especially when we get into the psalm that Jonah offers in chapter 2. It's not just a fishy story. It's not just a story about Pinocchio and all that stuff. This is a biblical book that has profound implications for even today, the way we live our lives, how we see the nations around us, how we see people that are different from us, maybe people that we have been taught somehow to dislike for whatever wrong reason. So do tune in as we go through the book of Jonah. It's really a joy for me to do this, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I'm enjoying doing it. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay well. Tune in tomorrow for our devotional. I think I've got a good one for you. See you soon.